Have you ever set a goal for yourself, something you truly wanted, only to find that, somehow, you became your own biggest obstacle? You start strong, full of motivation, but then the excuses creep in. You procrastinate. You convince yourself it's not the right time, or that you're not ready, or that failure is inevitable. It's a frustrating cycle, one where the person standing in your way isn't a rival, a critic, or bad luck. It's you. This isn't just a modern struggle. 2,000 years ago, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus put it plainly: no man is free who is not master of himself. And that's the heart of the problem. Self-sabotage isn't just about habits or willpower. It's about a deeper lack of mastery over our own minds. But what if there was a way to break free? What if the very patterns that hold you back could be dismantled, not through sheer force of will, but through a shift in perspective? Stoicism, the ancient philosophy practiced by emperors, slaves, and everyone in between, offers exactly that. It's not about suppressing emotions or grinding through life with gritted teeth. It's about understanding what's truly within your control, your thoughts, your judgments, your actions, and letting go of the rest. Imagine facing setbacks not as proof of your inadequacy, but as opportunities to practice resilience. Picture yourself making decisions from a place of clarity, not fear. That's the power of Stoicism. It turns self-sabotage into self-mastery. In this video, we'll explore how Stoic principles can help you dismantle the patterns that keep you stuck. We'll talk about control, not over the world around you, but over your own responses. We'll examine perception, how the stories you tell yourself shape your reality. And we'll dive into resilience, the art of bending without breaking. This isn't about quick fixes or empty motivation. It's about building a mindset that doesn't just resist self-sabotage, but renders it powerless. So if you're ready to stop being your own worst enemy and start becoming your own greatest ally, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Self-sabotage isn't just a bad habit. It's a rebellion against your own reason. Think about it. When you procrastinate on a goal, doubt your abilities, or talk yourself out of taking action, you're not just making a mistake. You're acting against your own best judgment, ignoring the part of you that knows better. The Stoics saw this as the root of human suffering, not external obstacles, but our own refusal to govern ourselves wisely. Seneca called these moments the slavery of the passions, where fear or craving overrules logic and we become strangers to our own mind. Here's the Stoic twist: self-sabotage doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you've handed the reins to emotions you haven't examined. Imagine standing at the edge of a diving board, terrified to jump. The water is safe, the height is manageable, but your mind screams danger. That's not reality, it's your judgment distorting reality. The Stoics would say your fear isn't about the dive, it's about the stories you've attached to it. What if I fail? What will people think? Those aren't facts. They're unexamined impulses masquerading as truth. Consider Seneca's letters, where he describes a man who craved wealth but ruined his health to get it. The irony: he wanted money to enjoy life, but his pursuit of it robbed him of life's joys. That's the paradox of self-sabotage. We chase things we think will bring freedom, only to enslave ourselves to irrational fears or desires along the way. The Antidote. Stoic prohereses the discipline of separating what's truly yours to control your choices from what isn't: outcomes, opinions, even your own fleeting emotions. So ask yourself, what's the hidden cost of your avoidance? When you put off a difficult conversation, is it really about the other person's reaction or your fear of discomfort? When you abandon a project, is it truly hopeless, or have you let doubt paint it that way? the Stoics taught that every irrational fear is a teacher in disguise. Your self-sabotage isn't a flaw, it's a signal pointing you toward the judgments you need to interrogate. And that's where freedom begins, not by fighting your impulses, but by understanding them. The moment you grasp the dichotomy of control is the moment self-sabotage loses its grip on you. Epictetus, the Stoic teacher who shaped generations of thinkers, framed it simply: some things are within our power while others are not. What is within your power? Your judgments, your impulses, your desires, the way you choose to respond to life. What isn't? Everything else: the weather, the past, other people's choices, even the final outcome of your efforts. That distinction isn't just philosophy, it's liberation. Because here's the trap: when you confuse the two, when you pour energy into worrying about things you can't change, you set yourself up for frustration before you even begin. Take a career setback, maybe a promotion you worked hard for but didn't get. Self-sabotage creeps in when you fixate on the uncontrollables. The boss played favorites, the system's rigged, I'll never get ahead. Those thoughts aren't just demoralizing, they're distractions. They pull your focus away from what you can do, refining your skills, seeking feedback, or even exploring new opportunities. The Stoics wouldn't tell you to shrug off disappointment, they'd urge you to redirect it. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Strength isn't pretending failure doesn't sting. It's refusing to let that sting dictate your next move. This is where most people get stuck. They believe control means bending the world to their will, so when life resists, they crumble. But real control is subtler. It's the quiet discipline of asking, where's my agency here? Maybe you can't control market trends, but you can adapt your business strategy. You can't force a loved one to change, but you can choose how you communicate. Even in loss, there's a sliver of control, how you let it reshape you. The poet and Stoic enthusiast Rainer Maria Rilke put it beautifully: let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going, no feeling is final. So try this: grab a sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. Label one, within my control, the other, beyond my control. Now think of a challenge you're facing, a goal you've avoided, a pattern you keep repeating. Fill in those columns ruthlessly. You'll likely find that most of your mental energy is spent on the second column, the opinions, the hypotheticals, the outcomes. That's the fuel of self-sabotage. The first column, that's your way out, because when you focus there, you're no longer at the mercy of circumstance. You're reclaiming the only thing that ever belonged to you in the first place, your next step. The beauty of the dichotomy isn't that it simplifies life, it's that it clarifies your power. You'll still face storms, but you won't blame the wind for your refusal to adjust the sails. That shift from resistance to responsibility is where Stoicism stops being a philosophy and starts being a practice. And practice, as Epictetus reminded his students, is how you turn insight into instinct. There's a profound shift that happens when you stop fighting reality and start embracing it, not with resignation, but with something far more powerful: love. The Stoics called this Amor Fati, a Latin phrase meaning love of fate, later championed by Nietzsche as the ultimate act of self-mastery. It's the radical choice to welcome everything life brings, not because it's always pleasant, but because it's yours. Think of it as the antidote to self-sabotage, quiet rebellion. When you resist what's already happened, dwelling on regrets, cursing setbacks, wishing things were different, you're not just rejecting circumstance. You're rejecting your own ability to grow from it. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor who ruled Rome through war and plague, wrote in his private meditations, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way. That's Amor Fati in action. It's not about pretending hardship doesn't hurt. It's about recognizing that the obstacle is the path. Imagine you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. You could rage against the red lights, tightening your grip on the wheel until your knuckles turn white. Or you could take a breath and ask, what can I do with this time? Maybe it's a chance to rehearse your presentation, listen to a podcast that inspires you, or simply observe the world outside your window. The traffic hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. This is where self-sabotage thrives, in the gap between what is and what you wish were true. Every time you think, this shouldn't be happening, you pour energy into a battle you can't win. The Stoics knew better. They understood that suffering isn't rooted in events themselves, but in our refusal to accept them. Picture a sailor cursing the wind instead of adjusting the sails. No amount of frustration will change the weather, but harnessing it, that's how you move forward. So where do you fight reality instead of adapting? Maybe it's the job you didn't get, the relationship that ended, or the mistake you can't undo. Ask yourself, what would it look like to love that fate, not because it's ideal, but because it's the raw material you've been given to build with? A sculptor doesn't complain about the grain in the marble. They work with it to reveal the art inside. That's the heart of Amor Fati. It's not passive acceptance. It's creative courage, the decision to say, this too belongs to my story. Consider the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks more beautiful than the original surface. The bowl doesn't pretend it was never shattered. It wears its history with pride. That's the shift Stoicism invites, from hiding your scars to letting them teach you, strengthen you, even adorn you. When you love fate, your failures, your detours, your unexpected turns, you disarm the part of you that whispers, you're not enough, because suddenly nothing is against you. Everything is fuel. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly. Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny. Notice he didn't say enjoy it. He said accept it. There's room here to grieve, to feel, to acknowledge pain, but not to let it define you. The moment you stop arguing with reality is the moment you reclaim your power to shape what happens next. After all, a tree doesn't waste energy resenting the wind that bends it. It grows stronger in the direction it's blown. That's the choice Amor Fati offers, to stop being at war with your life and start finding the gold in the cracks. What if you could face your biggest challenges not with dread, but with calm preparedness? The Stoics practiced something called Premeditatio, Malorum Latin for the premeditation of evils, but don't let the name mislead you. This isn't about pessimism or dwelling on worst-case scenarios. It's about stripping fear of its power by rehearsing life's difficulties before they happen. Seneca, who used this technique daily, described it as fortifying the mind in advance. Picture a fire drill. You don't practice because you expect disaster, but because readiness transforms panic into purposeful action. Here's how it works differently from negative visualization. While both involve imagining challenges, Premeditatio Malorum isn't just about acknowledging what could go wrong, it's about mentally scripting your response. Take a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's asking for a raise, ending a toxic relationship, or confronting a friend. Instead of avoiding it and letting anxiety fester, you'd walk through it step by step in your mind. What if they react defensively? What if I stumble over my words? The goal isn't to paralyze yourself with what ifs, but to rehearse your calm, measured reply. Seneca wrote, "The fool, with all his other faults, has this also: he is always getting ready to live." Premeditatio flips that script. You're not waiting for the perfect moment. You're becoming the person who can handle the imperfect ones. Consider how athletes use this principle. A gymnast doesn't just visualize sticking the landing. She mentally rehearses how she'll adjust if her hand slips on the bar. That's the Stoic edge. Preparation isn't just for success, it's for the stumble. When you've already lived through a challenge in your mind, the real thing loses its power to shock you. Marcus Aurelius practiced this nightly, reflecting. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Notice he didn't say this to breed cynicism, but to dissolve disappointment. By anticipating friction, he could meet it with patience rather than frustration. Now apply this to your own life. What's one challenge you've been avoiding because the uncertainty feels overwhelming? A career leap, a health goal, a long overdue apology. Try this, carve out 10 minutes to sit with it. Imagine the scenario unfolding not as a passive victim, but as someone who's already decided how to respond. If your boss says no to the raise, will you crumble or ask what skills would make you indispensable? If the conversation turns emotional, will you retreat or pause and recenter? This isn't about controlling outcomes, it's about reclaiming your agency within them. The brilliance of Premeditatio Malorum lies in its paradox. By confronting what scares us before it happens, we drain it of the power to derail us. Fear thrives in the unknown. Rehearsal turns the unknown into familiar territory. As Seneca put it, he who has seen the storm is not troubled by clouds. So next time you catch yourself avoiding something because the what-ifs feel too big, remember, the Stoics didn't wait for calm waters to practice navigation. They trained in the storm. Marcus Aurelius never intended his journal to become a classic of philosophy. His meditations were private reflections, raw, unfiltered notes to himself about struggles we'd all recognize. Irritation with colleagues, the pull of laziness, the weight of responsibility. Yet 2,000 years later, we're still reading them. Why? Because he wasn't writing to impress an audience. He was using the page as a mirror to spot his own self-sabotage before it could take root. That's the power of Stoic journaling. It turns self-awareness into armor against the patterns that derail us. Think of your mind as a courtroom where thoughts argue their case unchallenged. Self-sabotage thrives in those closed-door sessions, the hasty verdicts of "I'm not ready" or "it's too risky" go unquestioned. Journaling flips on the lights. When you write, "I'm avoiding this project because I might fail," and then ask, "Is that true? What's the actual cost of trying?" You're not just venting. You're cross-examining your own excuses. Epictetus taught that philosophy's job is to heal the human soul, and journaling is the scalpel, precise, revealing, sometimes uncomfortable, but always clarifying. Start with this prompt at the end of each day. Where did I resist my own growth today? Maybe you skipped a workout, telling yourself you were too tired, but was exhaustion the truth or just the easiest story? Perhaps you bit your tongue in a meeting when you had a valuable idea. What fear was behind that silence? The goal isn't self-reproach, it's pattern recognition. Marcus Aurelius didn't berate himself for feeling impatient with his advisors. He noted it, then dissected it. When you wake up irritable, remember, your rational self is stronger than moods. That's the shift journaling creates, from autopilot to authorship of your choices. Consistency beats perfection. Seneca wrote letters to his friend Lucilius nearly every day, not because each was a masterpiece, but because the act itself was the discipline. Your journal doesn't need eloquence, it needs honesty. Try a 3-sentence rule. Even on chaotic days, write just 3 lines. 1 observation: I postponed drafting my proposal again. 1 question: what's the real obstacle here? And 1 small commitment: tomorrow I'll write the first paragraph by 9 a.m. This isn't about grand revelations, it's about building the muscle of self-dialogue. The Stoics knew a truth modern science confirms. We're terrible judges of our own behavior. We overestimate our willpower, misunderstand our motives, and forget our lapses. Journaling fixes that. It's a ledger of your mental habits, revealing the gap between what you intend and what you do. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he was reminding himself as much as advising others. Your journal is that same whisper in your ear, not a critic but a witness holding up the facts. So tonight, before you sleep, ask the question he might have: what will I no longer tolerate from myself tomorrow? Not in anger, but in clarity, because every time you name a pattern, "I doubt my worth when I compare myself to others," or "I use busyness as an excuse to avoid hard decisions," you take back the pen. And that's where change begins, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet space between one honest sentence and the next. Imagine this: you're scrolling online, and suddenly, there it is, the perfect jacket, the one you didn't know you needed until this moment. Your finger hovers over the "Buy Now" button, your pulse quickens, the rational part of you whispers, "You don't need this," but the impulse drowns it out with, "But imagine how good it'll look." Click, and just like that, you've acted not from intention, but from a fleeting feeling you didn't even question. This is where Stoic mindfulness steps in, not to shame you for the purchase, but to ask something far more revealing. What if you'd paused long enough to interrogate that impulse before obeying it? Epictetus called this the discipline of assent, the crucial gap between feeling an urge and granting it permission to become action. He taught that our suffering doesn't come from the impulses themselves, but from our unchecked habit of saying yes to them. Modern mindfulness mirrors this with techniques like the STOP method: stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. Both traditions recognize the same truth: freedom isn't the absence of desires, it's the ability to choose which ones deserve your allegiance. Consider how this plays out in bigger moments than online shopping. A heated argument where you lash out with words you can't take back. A career decision made from fear rather than purpose. Even the small daily choices: hitting snooze instead of exercising, snapping at a loved one when you're stressed, each is a missed opportunity to insert that pause. Epictetus put it bluntly: if you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your judgment about them. The jacket isn't the problem, the story you told yourself about it. "This will fill a void. I deserve this after a hard day," is what needed examining. Here's the practice: next time you feel that familiar pull, whether it's toward your phone, the fridge, or an angry reply, freeze. Literally, let the impulse rise, but don't follow it. Instead, ask, what am I really seeking here? Comfort, distraction, validation? The Stoics weren't against enjoyment. They were against letting unconscious habits hijack your agency. Marcus Aurelius journaled about this nightly, reviewing where he'd acted mechanically rather than deliberately. His goal wasn't self-punishment, but awareness. Why did I say yes when I meant no? Why did I avoid what I knew was right? Modern psychology backs this up. Studies on implementation intentions show that pre-deciding your response to triggers. If I feel the urge to check social media at work, I'll write one sentence of my report first. Reduces impulsive actions by over 50%. It's not willpower, it's wiring your brain to insert that pause. The Stoics would call this prosauche, or attention, the art of noticing your mental chatter before it becomes behavior. So where does impulse most often override your reason? Maybe it's saying yes to commitments when you're already overwhelmed, or reaching for junk food when stressed. Try this for one day. Carry a small notebook. Each time you catch yourself acting automatically, jot down the trigger and the story driving it. Scrolled through my ex's photos because I felt lonely. No judgment, just observation. By evening, you'll have a map of where your autonomy is being outsourced to habit. That's the first step, not toward perfection, but toward presence. Because the gap between impulse and action isn't just a pause, it's the space where your sovereignty lives. What if everything you've been chasing, the approval, the promotions, the perfect image, wasn't just distracting you from true fulfillment, but actively feeding the cycle of self-sabotage? The Stoics drew a line in the sand. Virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline is the only true good. Everything else preferred or dispreferred, but ultimately indifferent. That might sound harsh, but think of it like this. If your self-worth is tied to things outside your control, like praise or social media likes, you've built your house on sand. One storm of criticism, one missed opportunity, and the whole structure shakes. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, put it bluntly: what is the fruit of these teachings? The most beautiful and fitting harvest: tranquility, fearlessness, and freedom. Notice what's missing. He didn't promise wealth, fame, or even success. He promised inner strength, the kind that doesn't crumble when externals do. That's the paradox. The more you chase validation or status to feel enough, the more power you give to things that can't truly fill the void. Every time you think, if only I had X, then I'd be happy, you're handing your self-worth over to a world that's famously unreliable. Here's how this fuels self-sabotage. Imagine you're preparing for a presentation. If your goal is virtue, doing your best with clarity and courage, you'll focus on what you can control. Thorough preparation, speaking truthfully, handling questions with grace. But if your goal is external praise, impressing your boss, avoiding judgment, suddenly fear creeps in. What if they think I'm boring? What if I stumble? That anxiety becomes the very thing that trips you up. The Stoics called this prosoch vigilance, against letting externals hijack your intentions. Consider how we often measure ourselves: by job titles, bank balances, relationship statuses. But history's most admired figures, from Socrates to Mandela, weren't revered for their wealth or comfort. They were celebrated for their character in adversity. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the Roman Empire, wrote in his private notes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Not a morbid threat, but a reminder. If today were your last, would you spend it fretting over gossip or cultivating what's truly yours, your integrity? So ask yourself, what externals have you subtly made conditions for your self-respect? Is it your partner's affection, your follower count, the number on the scale? This isn't about renouncing worldly things. Stoics weren't monks, but about disentangling your worth from them. Picture two artists. One paints for the joy of creation, the other obsesses over gallery sales. The first remains steady whether praised or ignored. The second's mood swings with every review. Which one is freer? The shift begins when you stop asking, "Did I succeed?" and start asking, "Did I act with wisdom and courage?" A Stoic doesn't celebrate a promotion because it flatters their ego, but because it offered a chance to serve others better. They don't mourn a rejection as proof of inadequacy, but as a test of resilience. Virtue becomes the compass, not the applause. And here's the secret: when you anchor yourself there, the very things you once chased lose their power to destabilize you. You'll still pursue goals. Stoics were deeply engaged in life, but you'll do it from a place of wholeness, not lack. Musonius Rufus taught that true education isn't about memorizing facts, but learning to live well. That's the invitation here, to measure yourself not by what you have, but by who you are in the having. Because the moment you stop outsourcing your worth, self-sabotage loses its leverage. No one can take your character from you. Not a bad day, not a failed project, not even a lifetime of setbacks. That's the unshakable foundation the Stoics offered. And it's yours to build on. There's a powerful exercise the Stoics practiced, one that might sound counterintuitive at first. but holds the key to dismantling the fear that fuels self-sabotage. It's called negative visualization, and no, it's not about dwelling on doom or expecting the worst. It's about rehearsing loss before it happens, not to paralyze you, but to liberate you. Picture this: you're terrified of failing a job interview. Instead of avoiding the thought, you lean into it. What if I stumble over my words? What if they reject me? Then you go deeper, and then what? Would I survive? The answer is always yes. That's the revelation. By facing the worst-case scenario head-on, you strip it of its power to intimidate you. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, was exiled to Corsica, a barren island far from Rome's glittering halls. Most would crumble under such a fall from grace. But Seneca, he wrote letters about the beauty of nature, the simplicity of life, and the unexpected gifts of his new reality. He'd practiced this mental discipline long before his exile, imagining the loss of status, wealth, even his own life. When fate delivered the blow, he wasn't shattered. He'd already walked that path in his mind and discovered something profound. The things we fear losing are often the very things that don't define us. This isn't pessimism, it's preparation. Think of it like vaccination. A small, controlled exposure to the virus makes you immune to its full force. When you mentally rehearse losing a client, a relationship, or a dream job, you're not inviting disaster. You're inoculating yourself against the panic that usually follows setbacks. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, reminding himself, loss is nothing but change, and change is nature's delight. The fear of failure shrinks when you realize that even in the worst case, you'd adapt, learn, and find new paths forward. So let's apply this. What's the failure that haunts you? Is it public embarrassment, financial ruin, being alone? Now, play it out not as a nightmare, but as a story where you're the protagonist navigating the storm. If your business failed, how might you rebuild with hard-earned wisdom? If a loved one left, what strengths might you discover in solitude? The Stoics weren't asking you to enjoy these scenarios, but to see them as survivable. Because once you know you can withstand the storm, the forecast loses its grip on you. Here's the twist: negative visualization doesn't just reduce fear, it deepens gratitude. By imagining life without your health, your home, or your relationships, you wake up to their value now. Seneca wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." That's the double gift of this practice. It prepares you for hardship while heightening your appreciation for the present. The interviewer's rejection stings less when you've already acknowledged that your worth isn't tied to their answer. The missed promotion hurts less when you've tasted contentment without the title. Try this tonight. As you lie in bed, picture one thing you cherish: your career, your partner, your freedom, and imagine it's gone. Sit with that hollow feeling. Then, watch as your mind begins to problem solve, adapt, and even glimpse unexpected silver linings. That's resilience being forged. Because when you've stared down the worst and realized you'd still be you on the other side, failure stops being a monster under the bed. It's just another chapter in your story, one you're already equipped to write. History offers us something rare in today's world: role models who weren't chasing likes, clicks, or curated perfection, but whose lives became masterclasses in resilience. Take Cato the Younger, the Stoic statesman who stood alone against Julius Caesar's rising tyranny. When defeat was certain, when even his allies switched sides, Cato didn't bend. He chose death over compromising his principles, not as a dramatic gesture, but as the final act of a life lived in unshakable alignment with virtue. To the modern eye, that might seem extreme, but here's what we miss. Cato wasn't just making a statement about politics. He was demonstrating something far more universal: that integrity isn't conditional. It doesn't flex based on who's watching or what's at stake. Now contrast that with the role models we often celebrate today, influencers whose worth is measured in followers, celebrities whose scandals overshadow their substance. There's nothing wrong with fame or success, but when admiration is rooted in image rather than character, we risk internalizing a dangerous lesson that external validation is the ultimate prize. The Stoics would call this a confusion of preferred indifference with true good. A million Instagram likes can't give you courage in adversity. A viral tweet won't steady your hand when life demands tough choices. This isn't about idolizing ancient figures as flawless heroes. Even the Stoics had their contradictions. Seneca amassed wealth while preaching simplicity. Marcus Aurelius waged wars while valuing peace. What makes them worth studying isn't perfection, but their relentless commitment to examining their flaws. That's the real lesson. Resilience isn't about never failing. It's about how you return to your principles after you do. So how do we apply this? Start by creating a personal virtue checklist. Not goals tied to outcomes. Get promoted, lose 20 pounds, but qualities you want to embody. Patience in frustration, honesty when it's inconvenient, generosity without expectation. Then study those who have lived these traits under fire. It could be historical figures like Epictetus, born into slavery yet shaping philosophy for millennia. Or modern examples, perhaps a teacher who inspires curiosity in underfunded schools, or a scientist persisting through decades of failed experiments. The key is to choose mentors whose lives remind you, this is how character looks in action. Ask yourself whose resilience stirs something in you, not because their life was easy, but because they transformed hardship into wisdom. Maybe it's a grandparent who carried kindness through hardship, or an activist like Mandela, who turned 27 years of imprisonment into a masterwork of reconciliation. Their stories aren't just inspiration, they're proof that the human spirit can forge meaning from even the cruelest circumstances. And here's the invitation: don't just admire these figures. Dialogue with them. When faced with a moral dilemma, ask, what would Cotto do? When ego whispers to take the easy path, channel Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. B1. Role models aren't meant to be put on pedestals, they're mirrors, showing us the strength we've yet to claim. Because the goal isn't to replicate their lives, but to distill their courage into your own choices. After all, history's most resilient figures didn't know they'd become legends. They were simply people who decided, day after day, that some things matter more than comfort. And that's a choice always within your reach. There's a hidden alchemy in Stoicism, one that doesn't remove life's obstacles, but transforms them into something unexpected: fuel. Marcus Aurelius scribbled it in his journal like a secret he'd uncovered. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. At first glance, it reads like a paradox. How can a roadblock double as a path? But this is the heart of Stoic reframing, the art of taking what feels like resistance and discovering the leverage hidden within it. Think of a blacksmith forging a sword. The hammer isn't destroying the metal, it's shaping it. The fire isn't ruining the blade, it's tempering it. Now apply that to your own life. That job rejection you agonized over, what if it wasn't a verdict on your worth, but a redirection? Maybe it pushed you toward an industry better suited to your strengths, or revealed a skill gap you're now motivated to fill. History's most resilient figures didn't avoid setbacks, they mined them for lessons. Thomas Edison's famous line about 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb wasn't just optimism, it was Stoic reframing in action. Every failure was data, not defeat. Here's how this works psychologically. When you label something as an obstacle, your brain treats it like a threat. Stress hormones flood your system, narrowing your focus to fight or flight. But reframe that same challenge as an opportunity, and suddenly your prefrontal cortex lights up, the part responsible for creative problem solving. The Stoics were masters of this mental switch. When exile could have broken him, Seneca wrote essays that shaped Western thought. When captivity could have crushed Epictetus, he built a philosophy of unshakable freedom. Their circumstances didn't change, their interpretation of them did. So try this with a recent setback. Maybe a project fell through or a relationship ended. Ask yourself, what did this reveal about my priorities? Where did it force me to grow? If you'd never faced that rejection, would you have taken the risk that led to your current success? If you'd never struggled with anxiety, would you have discovered mindfulness? Even physical pain can be reframed. An athlete's injury teaching patience, a chronic condition fostering empathy. The key isn't to pretend hardship doesn't hurt, but to refuse to let the pain be wasted. Marcus Aurelius faced rebellions, betrayals, and plague during his reign. Yet his journal isn't a chronicle of complaints, it's a manual for turning friction into forward motion. The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it, he wrote. That's the invitation here, to stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start recognizing yourself as the alchemist. Every no contains the seed of a better yes. Every loss carves space for something new. The obstacle isn't just in your way, it is the way. The question is, will you walk it? Epictetus once asked his students a piercing question. Why do you envy others when you could admire yourself? At the time, he was talking about neighbors with bigger farms or politicians with more power. But swap farms for followers and politicians for influencers, and his words hit just as hard today. The discipline of desire isn't about crushing your ambitions. It's about recognizing the difference between what nourishes your growth and what drains your peace. Every time you scroll through social media and feel that pang, their life looks perfect. Why isn't mine like that? You're not just comparing circumstances. You're handing your happiness over to something you can't control. Stoics called this orexis, the craving that distorts judgment. Imagine craving ice cream not because you're hungry, but because the ad made it look irresistible. Now scale that up, the promotion you must have, the relationship that should be yours, the lifestyle you deserve. The problem isn't the goals themselves, it's the frantic energy behind them, the quiet belief that achieving them will finally make you whole. Seneca saw this clearly. It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more. That's the irony of desire. It turns abundance into lack. You could have a roof over your head, food on the table, and people who care about you, yet still feel deprived because someone else's vacation photos whisper you're missing out. Here's where Stoic moderation flips the script. It's not about deprivation, it's about reorientation. Take envy. Instead of spiraling over a colleague's promotion, ask, what part of their success can I learn from? What's my own path? The craving softens when you realize admiration and insecurity can't occupy the same space. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. As emperor, he could have envied rivals or hoarded wealth. Instead, he wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." Not as a platitude, but as a mental reset. Comparison can't thrive where gratitude lives. Social media didn't invent this struggle, but it magnifies it. Algorithms thrive on manufactured discontent, the curated weddings, the highlight reels, the before and after transformations that skip the messy middle. The Stoic antidote, pre-rejection. Before logging on, remind yourself, I'm about to see a performance, not reality. It's like walking into a magic show knowing the tricks are illusions. The awe stays, the frustration fades. Epictetus would have loved this tactic. If you desire something outside your control, you're bound for disappointment. Scroll with that awareness and suddenly the envy loses its teeth. So what's your unnecessary desire? Is it the dream house that's become an obsession? The validation that never feels like enough. Try this, write it down, then ask, if I never achieved this, what would I still have? You'll likely find your real treasures: health, creativity, relationships were there all along. The discipline of desire isn't about wanting less, it's about wanting wisely, because when you stop chasing the mirage of more, you start seeing the abundance already in your hands. And that's where true freedom begins, not in possessing everything, but in needing very little. Consider this: when self-doubt creeps in, whispering that you're not good enough, not ready, not worthy, what if the antidote wasn't more achievement, but something far simpler? Gratitude, not the vague, fleeting kind, but the Stoic practice of deliberately anchoring yourself in what's already yours. Seneca wrote pages upon pages to his friend Lucilius about this very idea, urging him to count your blessings, not as a cliché, but as a radical act of resistance against the tyranny of not enough. He observed how we chase distant horizons while stepping over the treasures at our feet, how we measure ourselves against impossible standards instead of the solid ground beneath us. This isn't just feel-good advice. Neuroscience reveals that gratitude literally rewires your brain, dampening the amygdala's fear response while strengthening prefrontal circuits linked to rational thought. In other words, when you focus on what you have rather than what you lack, you're not just being positive, you're disarming the neural pathways that fuel self-sabotage. Think of a musician paralyzed by stage fright. If she fixates on the critics in the crowd, her hands shake. But if she pauses to appreciate the years of practice that brought her here, the privilege of sharing her art, the very fear that threatened to cripple her becomes manageable. The notes don't change her, her relationship to them does. Seneca took this further with his concept of pre-rehearsing loss. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your home gone, your health shattered, your loved ones vanished. Horrifying, yes, but his point wasn't to terrify, it was to jolt you into recognizing the gifts you barely noticed today, that slight twinge in your knee. It's a reminder of legs that still carry you, the colleague who irritates you, proof you're not alone. Even the bills on your desk signal you have resources to manage. Modern psychology calls this negative visualization, but the Stoics framed it as waking up from a trance. When you choose to see what you'd miss if it disappeared, enough stops being a compromise and starts feeling like abundance. Try this tonight. Grab a notebook and write down 3 things that didn't go wrong today. Your car didn't break down, your heart didn't stop beating. The water from your tap didn't vanish, mundane perhaps, but that's the point. We're surrounded by miracles we've grown blind to. Marcus Aurelius began his days by listing what he owed others, not as guilt but as grounding. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, not in the abstract but the tangible, the smell of coffee, the weight of a blanket, the quiet before the world wakes. Now the harder question, what are you taking for granted that someone else is praying for? The job you complain about is another's dream. The family you argue with is another's loneliness. This isn't about minimizing your struggles but contextualizing them. A Stoic doesn't deny pain, they refuse to let it erase their joy. Epictetus, born into slavery, found freedom in this realization. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Your turn. Start small. The heat in your shower, the book in your bag, the friend who texted you a meme this morning. Write one, then another. Watch as the list grows, and with it an unshakable truth: you were never inadequate. You are just looking in the wrong direction. Gratitude doesn't erase challenges, It gives you the clarity to face them without mistaking them for your worth. And that's the secret Seneca knew. When you stop measuring yourself against what's missing, you start realizing you've had the tools all along. Imagine two people standing in the same storm. One curses the wind, the rain, the unfairness of it all. The other adjusts their sails. This is the difference between victimhood and agency, and Stoicism draws that line with unflinching clarity. Epictetus, the philosopher who transformed his enslavement into a masterclass on inner freedom, put it bluntly: no one is hurt but by themselves. At first glance, it sounds harsh. How could he say that to someone who's been wronged, betrayed, or struck by tragedy? But here's the nuance: Stoicism isn't denying pain. It's rejecting the belief that pain gives others power over your future. Take a common scenario: you're passed over for a promotion. The victim narrative says, "My boss doesn't appreciate me, the system's rigged." It's not wrong. Maybe your boss is unfair, maybe the system is flawed. But the Stoic question is, now what? Will you chain your worth to someone else's approval, or will you focus on what's yours to shape? The colleague who blames the boss stays stuck. The one who asks, what skills can I sharpen? What feedback can I seek? They grow. Both face the same injustice. Only one let it define them. This isn't about shouldering false guilt. It's about reclaiming sovereignty. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," he wasn't suggesting you control every outcome. He was reminding you that your response is the ultimate leverage. Think of a ship's captain. They can't command the waves, but they can choose to learn navigation. That's Stoic accountability, shifting from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "What can I do with this?" So where does this show up in daily life? Maybe it's the friend who complains about loneliness but never reaches out. The entrepreneur who blames the market instead of refining their product. Even the small moments: blaming traffic for your lateness when you left late, or snapping at a partner because you're stressed. Each time you point outward, you surrender agency. Each time you ask, "Where's my role here?" you take it back. Epictetus taught that the thief who steals your purse takes coins, but the person who provokes your anger steals your peace unless you choose otherwise. That's the heart of Stoic responsibility, recognizing that while you didn't control the wound, you hold the pen that writes the next chapter. Try this reflection tonight. Trace a recent frustration back to its root. Did someone else's action trigger it? Absolutely. But where did your expectations, interpretations, or reactions amplify it? This isn't about blame, it's about freedom. Because the moment you stop insisting the world should be different, you start seeing all the ways you can be stronger. Seneca put it best: "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." The storm will come. The question is, will you curse the rain or learn to dance in it? Stoic detachment isn't about not caring, it's about caring differently. Picture a student burning the midnight oil before an exam. If their focus is solely on the grade, their peace hinges on something they can't control: the curve, the grader's mood, even a stray typo. But if they pour that same energy into mastering the material, into the process itself, their worth is no longer hostage to an outcome. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly. The reward of a thing well done is to have done it. That's the heart of Stoic detachment, not apathy, but a fierce commitment to what's yours: your effort, your integrity, while releasing your grip on the rest. This distinction matters because we often confuse detachment with disengagement. Think of a gardener planting seeds. Does she water them with care? Absolutely. But does she lie awake cursing the weather or demanding the sun cooperate? No. She tends what she can: the soil, the timing, the nurturing, and lets go of what she can't. That's not indifference, it's wisdom. The Stoics weren't urging us to abandon goals, but to realign where we place our sense of fulfillment. When your joy comes from the act of striving rather than the trophy at the finish line, you're no longer at the mercy of chance. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. You prepare meticulously for a client presentation, only for the projector to fail. The victim mindset rails against the malfunction, tying your self-worth to a smooth delivery. The Stoic mindset: you adapt, you pivot to a whiteboard, or you lean into the authenticity of the moment. The presentation's success isn't erased by the glitch, it's redefined by how you handle it. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire amid constant upheaval, wrote, "The cucumber is bitter, then throw it out. There are brambles in the path, then go around." That's all you need to know. Not every obstacle needs a dramatic reaction. Sometimes detachment is simply choosing the next right step. Now probe your own life. What outcome have you tied your happiness to? Is it a number on the scale, a salary figure, or someone else's approval? Notice how that attachment shapes your behavior. Do you skip workouts because progress feels slow, or withhold kindness until you're guaranteed reciprocity? The Stoic alternative isn't to stop wanting those things, it's to want them without needing them. Imagine training for a marathon not to boast a finish time, but for the grit you'll forge in the long runs. The race day might bring rain or cramps, but the growth, that's already yours. Here's the paradox: the less you cling to results, the more you're freed to pursue them with clarity. A musician obsessed with fame might chase trends, sacrificing their unique voice. One who plays for the love of craft, they'll create something timeless, and fame might follow, or it might not, but their fulfillment doesn't hang in the balance. Epictetus, who knew the fragility of external rewards better than most, put it plainly: freedom isn't secured by filling up on your heart's desire, but by removing your desire. So try this reframe. Next time you're fixated on an outcome, a job offer, a reconciliation, a milestone, ask yourself, what's within my control here? Your preparation, your attitude, your persistence. Anchor there. Let the rest be like weather, something you notice but don't confuse with your compass, because the deepest freedom isn't getting what you want. It's no longer letting what you want unsettle who you are. Marcus Aurelius had a habit of stepping back, way back, until his problems shrank to their true size. He called it the view from above, and it's one of the most liberating tools Stoicism offers for cutting through perfectionism's chokehold. Picture this: you're obsessing over a typo in an email you sent, replaying the moment in your head as if it were a catastrophe. Now, imagine floating high above the earth, watching continents shift over millennia, cities rise and fall, generations come and go. From that vantage point, does your mistake even register? That's the power of perspective, not to dismiss your efforts, but to reveal how much energy you're wasting on things that won't even ripple through time. Perfectionism isn't just about high standards, it's a form of self-sabotage disguised as diligence. You delay sharing your art because it's not ready. You fixate on a single criticism while ignoring 100 compliments. The Stoic antidote isn't to stop caring, it's to care about what truly lasts. Think of a potter meticulously smoothing a vase, only to accidentally nick its rim. From inches away, the flaw feels glaring, but place it on a shelf among other treasures, and it becomes part of the piece's character, if anyone even notices at all. Aurelius wrote in his journal, "Think of the substance of things as a torrent carrying all before it. The email typo, the awkward conversation, the missed deadline, they're all just leaves in that river already downstream." Here's how to practice this. Next time you're spiraling over a slip-up, ask 2 questions. First, will this matter in 5 years? Not theoretically, but concretely. That presentation you fumbled, odds are you'll remember it longer than anyone else. Second, what's the cost of my obsession? Perfectionism steals time, creativity, and joy, resources you could invest in progress instead. The Stoics weren't advocating apathy, they were prioritizing impact. A ship's captain doesn't panic over every wave, but stays focused on keeping the vessel steady. Consider the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection. A cracked teacup repaired with gold isn't discarded, it's revered for its history. That's the view from above in action, recognizing that flaws don't diminish your worth, they humanize it. Aurelius, ruling an empire, reminded himself daily, "You are a little soul carrying around a corpse." Morbid, maybe, but also freeing. If even emperors are fleeting, why let minor stumbles weigh you down? Try this tonight. Stand outside and look at the stars. Really look, feel the vastness, the silence, the sheer scale of time. Then, bring to mind what's been troubling you, not to minimize it, but to ask, does this deserve the space I've given it? Perspective doesn't erase challenges, it gives you the clarity to meet them without mistaking them for destiny. Because when you see your life as part of something larger, perfection stops being a demand and starts feeling like a distraction. And that's when you're free to create, to risk, to grow, flaws and all. Courage in Stoicism isn't about heroic acts on battlefields. It's about the quiet, relentless battle against the enemy within. Seneca put it bluntly, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. He wasn't talking about surviving wars or plagues, but about facing the daily temptations to retreat, procrastinate, or surrender to comfort. Real courage, the Stoics believed, is looking your self-sabotage in the eye and refusing to blink. Take the fear of public speaking, a universal anxiety that has little to do with the audience and everything to do with the stories we tell ourselves. What if I forget my lines? What if they judge me? The Stoic response isn't to suppress those fears, but to walk straight toward them. Why? Because every time you avoid speaking up, you reinforce the neural pathways that say, "This is dangerous." But when you step onto that stage, shaky knees and all, you're not just delivering a speech, you're rewiring your brain to recognize that discomfort isn't fatal. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." The sweat, the stammering, the adrenaline, they're not signs of failure, they're proof you're growing. Now zoom out. What's your version of that stage? Is it the difficult conversation you've been dodging, the career leap you keep postponing, the vulnerability required to ask for help? Courage doesn't demand grand gestures, it asks for the next right step, however small. Marcus Aurelius, who faced rebellion and betrayal as emperor, scribbled reminders to himself like, "The obstacle is the way." Not a pep talk, but a strategy. The very thing you're avoiding holds the lesson you need. Here's the paradox: the more you run from discomfort, the more power you give it. Think of a child terrified of shadows. The monster under the bed grows larger in the dark, but vanishes when examined under light. Self-sabotage thrives in avoidance. The moment you turn toward it, when you send that email you've overthought or voice the opinion you've swallowed, you reclaim agency. Epictetus, born into slavery, knew this intimately. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. His freedom wasn't granted, it was forged in choosing how to respond to chains. So ask yourself, what's one fear you've been sidestepping? Not the abstract, "I'm scared of failure," but the concrete, pulse-quickening scenario you actively avoid. Maybe it's negotiating a raise, ending a draining friendship, or publishing your writing. Now, imagine the cost of that avoidance. Not just the missed opportunities, but the silent erosion of self-trust each time you choose comfort over growth. The Stoics didn't preach fearlessness. They taught something far more practical. That courage is fear walking. It's not the absence of doubt, but the decision that your integrity matters more than your comfort. Seneca's letters often return to this theme. Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. You don't have to charge into battle with a war cry. Sometimes courage is just whispering, enough, and taking one step forward, because the irony of self-sabotage is this: the prison door was never locked. You've always held the key in your willingness to face what scares you and walk through anyway. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who shaped Epictetus, had a radical idea for his time: that luxury doesn't refine us, it distracts us. He didn't just mean material possessions, though. He spoke of a frugality of mind, the practice of stripping away unnecessary thoughts, goals, and commitments until only what truly matters remains. Imagine your attention as a beam of light. Scatter it across a dozen surfaces, and it barely illuminates anything. Focus it on a single point, and it cuts through darkness. That's the power of Stoic simplicity, not doing less, but removing everything that dilutes your power. Consider how modern life complicates this. You set 5 New Year's resolutions, join 3 online courses, and juggle commitments that leave you exhausted but unfulfilled. The problem isn't your ambition, it's the clutter obscuring it. The Stoics would call this mental hoarding, accumulating goals like trinkets, each one fragmenting your focus. Marcus Aurelius warned against this in his Meditations. If you seek tranquility, do less, not nothing, but less of what doesn't serve your core purpose. A sculptor doesn't create by adding marble to the block, but by chiseling away what isn't the statue. Here's how to apply this. Take your to-do list and ask for each item: does this align with my deepest values? Not just, is this useful, but does this nourish my growth or peace? You'll likely find half those tasks are someone else's priorities, societal expectations, or old goals that no longer fit. Musonius Rufus lived this. When students begged him for complex philosophical theories, he often replied with one question: are you practicing what you already know? Mastery, he taught, comes from depth, not breadth. Now probe your own life. What complexities are masquerading as productivity? The endless notifications that fracture your focus, the side projects that drain energy from your main mission. Even relationships that demand more than they give. Decluttering isn't about austerity. It's about creating space for what deserves your full presence. Picture a gardener pruning a vine. Cutting away the excess isn't cruelty, it's how the plant bears its sweetest fruit. The Stoics weren't minimalists to punish themselves. They chose simplicity to amplify their freedom. Epictetus, who owned nothing but a cloak and a bowl, joked that if he lost the bowl, he'd just drink from his hands. His point wasn't about bowls, it was about the lightness of needing so little. When you're not weighed down by unnecessary commitments, you move through life like water, flowing around obstacles instead of straining against them. So tonight, try this. Write down 3 things that drain your energy without enriching your life. Maybe it's a habit, a worry, or a half-hearted obligation. Then ask the question Musonius Rufus would pose: what would happen if I let this go? Often, you'll find the answer isn't catastrophe, but relief. Because simplicity isn't deprivation. It's the art of recognizing that you were never meant to carry everything. And in that realization, you'll find something unexpected. The space to breathe, to focus, and finally to thrive. There's an old farmer's proverb Seneca loved to quote: you can't rush the harvest. Picture a man sowing seeds one day, then returning the next to dig them up, furious they haven't borne fruit. We'd call him a fool, yet how often do we do the same? Modern hustle culture screams that faster is always better, that if you're not grinding day and night, you're falling behind. But the Stoics understood something radical: patience isn't passive. It's the quiet discipline of trusting the unseen growth happening beneath the surface. Seneca's letters are full of farming metaphors for a reason. A vine doesn't fret over why its grapes aren't ripe in May. It focuses on steady growth, knowing summer will come. Compare that to how we approach skill building today. We buy a language app and berate ourselves for not being fluent in a month. We hit the gym for 2 weeks and despair when our reflection doesn't match the ads. This isn't ambition, it's impatience masquerading as drive. The Stoic farmer knows something the modern hustler forgets. You can't cheat seasons. Mastery demands both action and the wisdom to let time do its work. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this daily, reminding himself, nature never hurries, yet everything is accomplished. The oak tree doesn't apologize for taking decades to grow. The river doesn't sprint to the sea. Hustle culture would have you believe that if you're not exhausted, you're not trying hard enough. Stoicism asks a different question. What are you rushing toward, and what are you trampling in your haste? Consider the musician who practices scales slowly until they're effortless, versus the one who races through complex pieces full of mistakes. Speed without foundation isn't progress, it's performance. Now look at your own life. Where are you digging up seeds prematurely? Maybe it's the business you launched last year that hasn't gone viral yet, or the meditation practice you abandoned because you didn't feel calmer after a week. Seneca observed that even the shortest-lived plants take time to root, yet we expect transformation overnight. This isn't about lowering standards, it's about respecting the arc of growth. A blacksmith doesn't strike the sword once and deem it forged. He returns to the anvil blow after blow, knowing each one matters, even if the metal doesn't bend immediately. The Stoic alternative to hustle isn't idleness, it's sustained effort. It's the gardener who waters the soil whether it rains or not because they're guaranteed a harvest, but because that's what the work requires. Epictetus, who trained his students relentlessly, put it plainly, progress isn't made by the impulsive, but by the persistent. You don't rush a sculpture by hitting the marble harder. You chip away day after day, trusting the form will emerge. So here's the challenge. Pick one area where you've been demanding instant results. Is it your fitness journey? A creative project, a relationship? Now ask yourself, what would it look like to show up for this like the farmer tends his field, not with frantic urgency, but with patient devotion? The harvest comes when it's ready. Your job isn't to control the timing, but to prepare the ground. And that's the secret Stoic patience reveals. The deepest growth happens when you stop watching the clock and start trusting the process. Epictetus once told his students, "You become like those whose company you keep, so choose companions who uplift your soul." He wasn't just offering advice, he was revealing a fundamental truth about growth. It's contagious. Think of a candle lighting another. No flame is diminished, but the room grows brighter. That's the power of a Stoic community. It's not about surrounding yourself with people who merely agree with you, but those who challenge you to live up to your principles, who reflect back the gaps between your aspirations and your actions. History's greatest Stoics didn't practice in isolation. Seneca exchanged letters with Lucilius, sharpening his ideas through dialogue. Marcus Aurelius learned from teachers like Rusticus, who handed him Epictetus's writings and changed the course of his life. Even Epictetus, though he taught in solitude, built a school where students gathered to dissect life's hardest questions. Why? Because wisdom thrives in conversation. When you articulate your struggles to someone who understands, you don't just vent, you clarify. When you hear another's perspective, you don't just listen, you discover blind spots you'd never noticed alone. This isn't about finding perfect people. The Stoics weren't seeking gurus or saints. They were seeking fellow travelers. Imagine two friends committed to Stoic practice. One loses their temper and later reflects, "Why did I react that way?" The other doesn't shame them but asks, What story were you telling yourself in that moment? That's the alchemy of shared growth, not judgment, but mutual excavation of the beliefs driving behavior. Modern research supports this. Accountability partners increase goal success rates by over 60%. But Stoicism takes it deeper. It's not just about hitting targets, but aligning your entire way of seeing. So where do you find such a community? Start locally. Philosophy cafes, meetups, or even book clubs reading Stoic texts can become unexpected wells of support. Online, forums like the Stoicism subreddit or Discord groups offer global connections. The key isn't the platform, but the quality of engagement. Are discussions rooted in applying wisdom or just debating it? Are members humble enough to say, "I'm working on this too," rather than posing as masters? Epictetus warned against those who philosophize with their lips only. Seek those who walk the path, however stumblingly. Now, look closer to home. Who in your existing circle already embodies this spirit? Maybe it's the coworker who stays calm under pressure, showing you what equanimity looks like in action, or the friend who asks, "What's the wisest choice here?" Instead of egging on your complaints, you don't need a formal group to begin, just one person willing to reflect deeply with you. The invitation here isn't to collect Stoic acquaintances like badges, but to cultivate relationships where growth is the unspoken agreement. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, friendship always benefits, love sometimes injures. Choose companions who love you enough to point you toward your higher self, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in the end, your philosophy isn't just what you read, it's who you become in the presence of others. And that's a choice no one can make for you. Marcus Aurelius had a habit of poking fun at himself in his private journals. Amidst the weight of ruling an empire, he'd jot down reminders like, "You're just a little soul carrying around a corpse," a morbidly playful way to cut through the illusion of self-importance. That's Stoic humor in action, not cracking jokes to avoid pain, but wielding lightness like a scalpel to dissect the stories that magnify our struggles. When you trip over your words in a meeting and your face burns with embarrassment, there are two paths. You can spiral into self-flagellation, "They'll never respect me now," or you can channel Marcus and think, "Well, that was a graceful performance." Bravo, the event stays the same, the suffering doesn't have to. The Stoics weren't comedians, but they understood the power of levity to disarm self-sabotage's favorite weapon, taking yourself too seriously. Think of a child who falls while playing. If they look around and see alarmed faces, they'll wail. If the adults laugh and say, "Whoops, nice tumble," they'll likely giggle and scramble back up. Our inner critic works the same way. When you treat minor failures like catastrophes, you train your brain to fear them. When you laugh at them, you strip them of their power to derail you. Seneca, who faced exile and political persecution, wrote, "A jest often decides matters of importance more effectively and happily than seriousness." He wasn't suggesting you mock genuine pain, but that you refuse to let trivial stumbles become existential crises. Here's where this gets practical. Next time you spill coffee on your shirt before a big meeting, instead of muttering, "Of course this happens to me," try narrating it like a nature documentary. The Homo sapiens in its natural habitat, nervously fumbling its caffeine sustenance. It sounds silly, that's the point. You're not denying the inconvenience, you're shrinking it to its true size. Modern psychology calls this cognitive distancing, stepping back from a situation to view it with detachment. The Stoics just called it wisdom. Epictetus taught that it's not events that disturb us, but our interpretations. Humor rewires those interpretations on the spot. Now probe deeper. What do you treat with undue solemnity? Is it your productivity, your image, your rigid routines? Imagine your inner drill sergeant barking. You must finish this perfectly or else. Now picture giving that sergeant a clown nose. The demand doesn't vanish, but its grip loosens. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, joking about his own mortality to counterbalance the empire's demands. "You've lived as a citizen in a great city," he wrote. 5 years or 50, what's the difference? Not to dismiss life's value, but to zoom out and see how small even our grandest worries are in the cosmic laugh track. Try this tonight. Reflect on a recent frustration, a missed deadline, a social gaffe, a plan gone awry. Then write about it in the style of a satirical news headline. Local human overthinks email reply for 40 minutes. Civilization somehow endures. The exercise isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about reclaiming perspective. Because when you can laugh at your stumbles, you stop fearing them. And that's when the real growth begins, not in the shadow of perfection, but in the light-hearted acceptance that you, like everyone else, are gloriously, messily human. Imagine ending your day not with exhaustion, but with intention, where sleep isn't just rest, but an act of discipline. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, understood this deeply. His evenings weren't spent scrolling or stewing over tomorrow's worries. Instead, he practiced what he called sesessus, a deliberate retreat into stillness. In letters to his friend Lucilius, he described reviewing the day's events with a clear mind, separating what he controlled from what he didn't, then releasing it all like unclenching a fist. No screens, no stimulation, just the quiet work of unwinding the mind. For Seneca, bedtime wasn't an afterthought. It was the foundation of tomorrow's clarity. Modern science confirms what the Stoics intuited. Poor sleep doesn't just leave you tired, it erodes your willpower. Think of your self-control as a reservoir. Every decision you make, resisting distractions, sticking to routines, managing emotions, draws from that pool. And when sleep deprivation drains it, guess what thrives? Impulse, procrastination, self-sabotage. Studies show that after just one night of poor rest, the brain's amygdala, the panic button for fear, goes into overdrive, while the prefrontal cortex, your rational decision maker, slows to a crawl. That's why you're more likely to skip the gym, snap at a colleague, or binge junk food when exhausted. Your body isn't failing you, it's running on empty. So how do you break the cycle? Start with Seneca's wind-down ritual, adapted for today. An hour before bed, silence notifications and step away from screens. The blue light isn't just keeping you awake, it's feeding your mind a steady drip of distractions, training it to crave constant stimulation. Instead, try what the Stoics called lucubratio, evening reflection by lamplight. Jot down 3 things you handled well today, 1 lesson learned, and 1 intention for tomorrow. Not a to-do list, but a single focus. Tomorrow, I'll listen more than I speak in meetings, or I'll start my morning with 10 minutes of stillness. This isn't journaling for productivity. It's a mental decluttering, creating space for rest. Now, consider the cost of ignoring this. When you sacrifice sleep for just 1 more episode or late-night emails, you're not trading an hour, you're mortgaging tomorrow's resilience. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this at dawn. When you arise unwillingly, remember that you're made for action, but action requires fuel. Imagine 2 versions of yourself tomorrow, one groggy, reaching for caffeine and temper shortcuts, the other rested, responding to challenges with patience and presence. The difference isn't luck, it's the choice you made the night before. The Stoics didn't chase perfect sleep conditions, no blackout curtains or white noise machines. They cultivated something deeper, respect for rest as a partnership with wakefulness. Epictetus, who slept on a simple cot, taught that true freedom lies in aligning with nature's rhythms. You don't fight the tide, you learn when to swim and when to float. Tonight, when the pull of distraction tugs at you, ask Seneca's question, what am I preparing myself to face tomorrow? Because the path to self-mastery doesn't begin at dawn. It starts the moment you decide today's last act won't be surrender to chaos, but a quiet reclaiming of peace. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, saw food not just as fuel, but as training ground for self-mastery. In lectures that shocked ancient Rome, he argued that how we eat reveals more about our character than our philosophies. Picture this: you've had a draining day, and without thinking, you reach for that third cookie. The Stoics wouldn't judge the cookie, they'd question the autopilot behind it. Because emotional eating isn't about hunger, it's about handing the reins to fleeting impulses rather than reason. That's where Stoic nutrition begins, not with rigid meal plans, but with the simple act of pausing to ask, why am I eating this? Modern science now confirms what Musonius observed centuries ago. The gut produces 90% of the body's serotonin, meaning what you eat directly shapes your mental clarity. A diet heavy in processed sugars doesn't just weigh down the body. It clouds judgment, spikes anxiety, and mimics the same crash and chase cycle as other cravings. The Stoic alternative isn't asceticism, it's awareness. Imagine sitting down to a meal and actually tasting each bite, noticing when satisfaction arises instead of eating until the bag is empty. That's not deprivation, it's reclaiming the space between impulse and action. Consider the contrast between two office workers. One devours a fast food lunch at their desk, barely registering the flavors while scrolling through emails. The other steps away for 20 minutes, savoring a simple meal of vegetables and grains, using the break to reflect on the morning's challenges. Both are fed, but only one is nourished. Musonius taught that meals should be moderate and mindful, not because pleasure is wrong, but because thoughtless consumption trains the mind to seek quick fixes in all areas of life. This isn't about labeling foods good or bad. Stoicism rejects dogma. It's about recognizing patterns. Do you snack when stressed, feast after self-doubt? Those aren't failures, they're signals. The ancient Stoics fasted periodically, not to punish the body, but to remind themselves, hunger is uncomfortable, not intolerable. Cravings pass. When you sit with temporary discomfort instead of numbing it, you strengthen the same mental muscle that resists procrastination or impulsive anger. So tonight, try this. Before your next meal, pause for 3 breaths. Note the colors on your plate. Chew slowly enough to distinguish the spices. If you reach for dessert, ask honestly, is this hunger or habit? The goal isn't perfect choices, but conscious ones, because every mindful bite is a whisper to your deeper self. You're not just feeding a body, you're training a mind. And that's where true nourishment begins. Seneca once wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it. Yet how many of our hours vanish into screens without leaving traces of meaning?" Digital minimalism isn't about rejecting technology. It's about reclaiming the one resource you can never replenish, your attention. Think of your focus as currency. Every time you reflexively check notifications or fall into endless scrolling, you're not just killing time, you're auctioning off fragments of your life to the highest bidder. The Stoics would call this a modern form of slavery, not chains of iron, but algorithms designed to hijack your autonomy. Consider the social media detox not as a temporary cleanse, but as a Stoic experiment in agency. When you silence notifications for a week, something revealing happens. The first day feels like withdrawal, phantom vibrations, restless fingers itching to swipe. By day 3, the fog lifts. You notice how often you used your phone to avoid discomfort, awkward silences, difficult thoughts, or simply being alone with your mind. That's the heart of digital minimalism. It's not about deleting apps. It's about deleting the habit of using distraction to flee from yourself. Seneca warned, "We are tight-fisted with property and money, yet think too little of wasting time, the one thing about which we should all be the toughest misers." Now examine your own digital landscape. Which platform leaves you feeling drained rather than energized? Is it the newsfeed that amplifies outrage, the comparison trap of curated highlight reels, or the endless loop of videos that leave no room for reflection? The Stoic approach isn't blanket condemnation, it's discernment. Epictetus advised, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid regarding external things. In today's terms, if logging off makes you feel out of the loop, that discomfort is the exact muscle you need to strengthen. Try this audit for one day. Track every digital interaction with a simple label: nourishing, neutral, or draining. You might find your productive email checks are actually anxiety spikes in disguise, or that 15 minutes of messaging leaves you more exhausted than an hour of deep work. The goal isn't to eliminate all drains immediately, but to become conscious of the trade-offs. Marcus Aurelius meditated daily on his actions. What is this bringing to my soul? Apply that to your screen time. Does that extra hour of gaming recharge you, or is it a numbing agent for stress you've avoided addressing? Digital minimalism reveals a paradox: the less you consume, the more you create. When composer John Cage wanted to hear pure silence, he entered an anechoic chamber only to discover the sounds of his own nervous system. Similarly, when you strip away digital noise, you meet the raw materials of your own mind, ideas waiting to be written, problems ready for solutions, stillness that births clarity. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they understood distraction as the enemy of wisdom. You must become either a god or a cosmopolite. Musonius Rufus taught, meaning you either shape your world or are shaped by it. So tonight, as you charge your devices, ask Seneca's question: how much of your life did that screen earn today? Not in guilt, but in curiosity. Because every swipe you don't make is a moment reclaimed, not just from distraction, but for the life you actually want to live. Marcus Aurelius kept a skull on his desk, not as a morbid decoration, but as a daily whisper: remember you must die. The Stoics called this practice Memento Mori, not to dwell on death, but to sharpen life. Picture standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling the wind tug at your clothes. That vertigo isn't just fear, it's clarity. Suddenly, the trivial, the grudges, the procrastination, the endless scrolling falls away, and what remains is starkly simple. This moment is all you're guaranteed. The emperor wrote in his private journal, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think, not as a threat but as a liberation." When time is finite, every later becomes a gamble. Consider how differently you'd approach today if you knew it was your last. Would you replay that argument in your head, or would you call the person you love and tell them? Would you refresh your inbox, or would you finally write the first page of that book? Procrastination isn't laziness, it's the illusion of infinite tomorrows. Seneca nailed this when he wrote, "We are dying every day. The meeting you dread, the dream you postpone, the kindness you delay, those aren't just items on a to-do list. They're fragments of a life you're assuming you'll have." The Stoics didn't meditate on death to depress themselves. They did it to wake themselves. Here's the paradox: confronting mortality doesn't shrink your life, it expands it. A traveler with a one-way ticket savors each sunset more deeply. A musician with a fading voice sings each note with ferocious tenderness. Mortality is the lens that brings urgency into focus. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet his meditations return again and again to the same humbling truth. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. No title, no wealth, no achievement spares you from the ultimate deadline. But here's the gift in that. When status and ego dissolve, what's left is raw, unfiltered purpose. Try this exercise tonight. Write down 3 things you'd do if you had a year to live. Then ask, what's stopping me from starting now? Not the grand, impractical gestures, the real, tangible steps. Maybe it's reconciling with a sibling, launching a side project, or simply walking in the woods without your phone. The gap between that list and your daily routine is where Memento Mori does its work. It's not about cramming life with bucket list exploits, but stripping away the noise to reveal what you'd fight to keep. The Stoics weren't urging you to live in fear of the end. They were teaching you to knead that awareness into the dough of your days. A baker doesn't obsess over the oven timer. She smells the bread, feels its texture, and knows when it's ready. Likewise, death meditation isn't a countdown, it's a compass. When you stop pretending you have forever, you start living like you mean it. And that's the secret hidden in the skull on Marcus' desk. The best way to cheat death isn't to avoid it, but to live so fully that when it comes, you've left nothing essential unsaid. We've traveled a long road together, from recognizing self-sabotage whispers to dismantling them with Stoic wisdom. Let's gather the tools we've forged. Control, not over the world, but over your judgments. Acceptance, not as surrender, but as clarity to work with reality. Virtue, the unshakable compass that outlasts every storm. These aren't abstract ideas, they're lifelines. When procrastination whispers tomorrow, control asks, what's one small action I can take right now? When fear shouts failure, acceptance reminds you that setbacks are just data, not destiny. When comparison taunts not enough, virtue redirects your gaze inward. Am I living by my own standards? Empowerment doesn't come from rearranging the world to suit your comfort. It grows from the quiet realization that you've always held the keys to your attention, your efforts, your values. Epictetus, who knew the weight of chains better than most, left us with this challenge. First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Not wish, not hope, do. That's the Stoic secret in 4 words. Decide, then act. Your turn. Tonight, open your journal or a blank page and answer one question. What's the first move only I can make? Maybe it's deleting the apps that drain your focus, or finally sending that difficult email. Perhaps it's simply sitting with discomfort for 5 minutes instead of numbing it. No step is too small when it's taken with intention. This journey doesn't end here. Share your step in the comments, not as a promise to strangers, but as a pact with yourself. What we voice aloud gains weight, and to those who have walked this path today, thank you. Philosophy isn't a lecture, it's a conversation across centuries, and you've just added your voice. Keep going, the road is short.